Alright everybody, we've covered how to make landscapes, we've covered how to use the splines, we've covered how to use some of those tools, we covered how to make some cool elements. We actually have to color this now. Now I showed you guys that the landscape itself has an entry for a landscape material. This is technically incorrect. This is not going to apply a texture the same way that a texture could be applied on an object. Do you guys remember a few weeks ago how I showed you guys how to make a texture? That works for static mesh objects and that works for smaller objects. The landscape is a different breed of cat. Essentially what we need to worry about here is optimization. The landscape itself does not want to be optimized. The landscape itself wants to get as much eat as much quality as possible and lag our systems if it's possible for it to do so. That's what it wants to do. It is born and bred to eat as much performance as possible with some ways that we can save on performance. Because the landscape material is different from any material that you guys already know, I need you guys to pay attention to this particular demo because this is going to actually start by more or less illustrating how each of these systems work in order to make our appropriate landscape. Okay? So I would encourage you to follow along. You don't have to get, I'm not going to use the Megascans materials right away, but I will use them at some point so that you guys get an opportunity to see kind of how all of this comes together. Okay? Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So we want to texture this now, right? Unfortunately, we don't really have the capacity to do so. Let's go ahead and make a new layer. If you didn't make a layer initially with your material or with your landscape, you can enable edit layers right here. Do not undo it if you have it done. If you undo the layers, you basically lose everything. It's not mandatory that it's on, and it's kind of a system that needs a little bit of work, but it's actually quite nice to kind of get working when it's time to actually work on some stuff. I'm going to go ahead and go into the paint section of the landscape, and as you can see, we still have access to everything. So we were in the sculpt previously, and we have our paint layer. We can go ahead and create a new layer, and we can go ahead and name this. Actually, let's not do that. Let's go ahead and name this. We have our base sculpt, so this is our base layer. We can go ahead and call this our base layer. Click on that. Now, my advice is you should paint everything on one layer unless you know what you're doing with your blending modes. Painting on other layers can get incredibly terrifying when it comes to blending across different layers. Okay? I'm going to warn you guys not to paint across layers for now, but I am going to say that with a caveat that I will probably show how to do it here shortly. Now, if you have the starter content, we have the Megascans for now. We'll replace our master material, but if you have the starter content, go ahead and follow along if you feel so inclined. I'll try to go slow. Let's go ahead and create a new folder called Materials. Let's make a new material, and we're going to call this Material Landscape. Or the correct nomenclature is actually M_terrain or M_terrain. Okay, cool. So we have our terrain made. Let's go ahead and open this up. Okay. Let's go ahead and grab some materials that we can work with so I can show you guys a proof of concept, and then we'll use the Megascans on the other material. Let's go ahead and grab some. I'm going to hold down T and create some texture samples. T and left click. And I'm going to do this for another layer. 1, 2, and 3. So go ahead and make your start look something like this. Okay? If you're feeling nasty and you want to feel like you want to set this up, set up a texture parameter 2D if you feel real nasty and like you feel like setting up, because these can be converted to parameters as well. But these will have an error because for some reason it doesn't find this particular texture. I don't know why it doesn't find the default texture. What I like to do is I like to open up a parameter 2D or 2D parameter. I'd like to find these, and they're inside the engine resources. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that it should be selected. There we go. And we'll see if it lets us use it. Sometimes it doesn't. Let's go ahead and see if I can use the default texture here. It's being weird about how it wants to use that. Let's go ahead and do this. There we go. So essentially you can make kind of your own version of this. But what I like to do is copy this a bunch of times. Let's go ahead and just leave this alone for now. We'll worry about making this a master material later if we really want to. But we'll do this kind of the old-fashioned way. Not really old-fashioned. Let's go ahead and select the texture sample here, and we'll go ahead and grab the T ground grass D. We will also grab the, and this is all in the starter content as well as in the engine content. So if you have this stuff already, this should be okay. I'm going to hide my engine content because I really don't want to see it. It makes me nervous to see that much stuff. Let's go ahead and grab the gravel, T gravel D. And the last one we're going to grab, let's grab something that we can see, just for testing purposes. We'll grab the T brick hewn stone. It's not important which one of these that you grab as long as you have 3 separate textures that you can see and that you can manipulate on your own. Okay. So we now need to do the same thing for whatever other maps that we're going to use for those. In this particular case, we're going to be using just the color map and just the height map. We're not going to worry about any of the other maps. We're going to keep this fairly simple. So we're going to go ahead and grab the grass normal, ground grass normal. We're going to grab the gravel underscore N. There it is right there. And we're going to grab the hewn stone N. So we're going to grab all of the normal maps for these textures. Okay? So whatever you do, if you're following along, if you're going to use your own custom textures, make sure you are going to be using your own. Now, I'm going to give you guys a landscape material or a terrain shader that you guys can use on your own. It's part of a larger pack that I use a lot for demos, especially demos for high school and whatnot. But it saves hours on making your own landscape material. I will show you how complex it is. But for now, let's just go ahead and stick with what we know. Let's also go ahead and make some constants here. Let's not make these scalars. Let's go ahead and create 3 constants. This is made by 1 and left click, or making just a regular constant 1. We just want to make 3 of these little guys. They're our friends. They will help. And let's go ahead and set all of these to a value of 0.85, just so that we have the math set up for our scene properly. This will set up our roughness for our scene. And let's go ahead and put these right here. Alright. If you click the background and then type in the word landscape, the entire system for landscape is actually its own bespoke system for texturing, meaning that you cannot use the standard, you can't use the standard like a text scored node. This does not work. Text scored multiply scalar. This does not work for landscape. Landcapes. This needs to be modified in order for it to work. Right? So this does not work for landscapes. So how are we going to scale and actually develop and create our landscape properly? Well, it's funny you mentioned that, because there is a way to actually make this work. What we need to do is we need to create something called a landscape blend. So go ahead and create a landscape layer blend. And go ahead and add 3 array elements to it. Everybody see this kind of scary looking blend? We're going to paint using this landscape. This is going to allow us to paint using those layer tools. Awesome. Let's go ahead and select these layer names, and let's go ahead and in the layer blend, let's call it grass. And let's keep scrolling down to the next index. Layer name over here. Let's go ahead and move that a little bit so we can see it. Let's go ahead and call it gravel. And the last one can be stone. Awesome. All right. The next thing we want to worry about is making sure that we have the ability to blend these properly. I'm not going to get into the semantics of the different types of weight blending. LB weight blend is going to be what you want to leave this as for now. And then we'll worry about the rest when we run into bugs. Okay? Although typically you guys will probably not run into any bugs. Now that we have this set up, we need to actually set up our preview weight. So let's set this up initially so we can see something on the screen. I'm going to go ahead and plug in the RGB from our grass layer into the grass, the gravel into the gravel, and the hewn stone into the stone. Now nothing's going to pop up initially, but let's go ahead and plug in our base color here. And while I'm at it, I'm going to create another one constant and plug this into metallic, and that'll be my metallic map. That'll be 0. Mr. Figueroa, nothing's showing up. Yes, I know. Nothing is going to show up because this is still not actually built. This is very similar to what we did during the first week of the materials trading. This is not actually applying anything. We actually have to create one more thing. We need to create something called a landscape layer coordinates node. This is very similar to this, except this doesn't work on landscapes. This only works on tiling images. This works on tiling images for the landscape system. Let's plug this into our UVs. Notice how we still can't see anything. Let's go ahead and click on the layer blend. And does everybody see this preview weight here? I'm going to set the preview weight for the grass to 1. Okay, but what about the other materials? Set it to 0. Preview weight to 1. Oh, set that back to 0. Sorry, meant to hit enter there. So back to 0. Okay, we can see kind of our rocks there, our gravel. Set this preview weight back to 0. And set the preview weight for the last one to 1. And hitting enter. Okay, so we can clearly see that this is actually working. This is loading. This is creating stuff in the viewport. Then why can't we see it? This is because when you are blending materials, the engine doesn't actually know how to blend it in the viewport for you. Since this is not an opaque material, and this is a very special material that's linked to the landscape system, unfortunately, the preview is not going to work. If you want to get the preview working, you actually have to blend these in certain amounts. So for example, let's blend the stone, 50% stone, so this will kind of appear a little bit washed out. And let's put 50% of the grass in the preview weight by setting a 0.5. Does everybody see kind of what's happening? Does everybody still see like kind of the little bumps of the stone? Let's set this to like 0.1. Does everybody see how you can still kind of see the grass? Let's set this to 0.35. There's a magic ratio that everything will kind of be visible. Okay, cool. Let's go ahead and turn the preview weight on for the gravel. I'll set the 0.5 maybe. Let's set this to 1. Okay, we can kind of see all three kind of being brought together, right? What I usually like to do is I divide 100% by however many textures I have. So 0.33, 0.33, 0.33. Awesome. Look at that. That's 30% mix of 100. That leaves 99.9 of what our material is supposed to look like when it's fully blended together. This is really just to make you feel better about whether or not you blended everything together properly. Okay. Let's go ahead and grab our layer blend node here, and we'll duplicate it. We're actually going to go ahead and plug this into our roughness, and we can apply a global roughness to each of these layers. So all of this is receiving a global roughness based on what we're plugging in here. This is not generally how you would do this. You would actually have your roughness maps, but obviously we're trying to make this simple for learning because this is an intro class and this stuff can be kind of really hard to learn initially. So our roughness is in. Let's go ahead and grab the last layer blend, duplicate that, and we're going to go ahead and grab the, just for the purpose of showing that this is actually blending properly, let's go ahead and plug in our normal maps, and I'm going to add a base color here. You guys don't have to do this. I'm just going to add a base color so that we can see what's happening. So our normal map is being added. Let's disconnect this one. Our normal, this is going to be more obvious. It's from the gravel. Let's look at the detail lighting. So you can see that the geometry is being displaced by our normal map and everything. Let's go ahead and plug the rest of these in. So you can see all of these have been loaded up. Holding down L to move this around. All of these have been loaded up. And if we look very closely, we can see that all of those materials are being blended together. Awesome. Let's go ahead and save that. And let's go ahead and plug in our actual material here, our base color. And we can go ahead and delete that. So I was using that just to show. Oh, and let's go ahead and go back into lit mode. Take a look at it. Yeah, everything looks great. This is ready to rock and roll. Our material is done and ready to start painting landscapes. You are now ready to make landscapes. Congratulations. Let's get rid of this. Save. And close. Now, we don't have any material instances or anything in there. We don't have to worry about that for now. Give that a second to compile. Sometimes it can be a little weird. There it goes. It's compiling. There we go. Okay. So our material has compiled. Let's go ahead and actually apply that. Let's go ahead and call it terrain. Now, be ready for what's about to happen. Does everybody see what just happened? Does everybody see that it's kind of like we're walking on the edge of the earth? This is like the Superman movie endings. This is correct. If you see this, if this is what it does and this is what it looks like, then your material is working properly. If we look down here in the paint layers, we see that everything is in fact working properly. Our target layers do all appear, and we have a paint layer that we can paint on. Okay, slick. Let's go ahead and pick a base layer. I'm going to start by picking a gravel layer as my base layer. As you can see, there's nothing down here to showcase its asset. You need to go ahead and click on this button right here to create layer info. This creates an opportunity to create a weight blended layer. This is the one that you want to default to. A non-weight blended layer are for alpha channels that essentially right on top. We won't ever really use these in this particular class. There are other ways to do this a lot easier, including using decals. But for now, go ahead and select Weight Blended Layer Normal. Make sure you are in the correct paint layer, or if you don't have layers enabled, make sure that you have one of your layers selected. Weight Blended Layer Normal. And it's going to ask you, hey, where do you want to save this? Use the default folder. Trust me, it'll save a lot of time. I didn't name this particular level, so I'm going to go ahead and cancel that for now. And I'm going to go ahead and Control-Shift-S, and we're going to call this Painting 101. And then I'm going to go ahead and save, do the same thing. There we go. It's going to try to save it in my maps, Painting 101, Shared Assets. Let's go ahead and hit save. Now it's going to want to compile, and it's going to very stupidly apply everything everywhere from that one particular layer. This is fine for now. Let's go ahead and scale down my paintbrush so we can start painting some things. Okay, that's all well and good. We can very clearly see that this is painting out properly. This is, you know, it doesn't look pretty, but it works, right? Watch this. Let's grab our grass. Let's do the same thing. And let's create a weight blended layer normal. Let's leave it in the same place. What this is doing is it's creating something called a layer info file. Layer info is where the engine decides what areas are actually being painted and what is valid to paint. Let's go ahead and make a new layer info. As you can see, it made a new layer info for the grass, which carries a lot of different interesting elements that we can worry about. We won't worry about these in this class. We're just going to learn about painting for now. I'm going to close this. If you lose it, you can go ahead and reopen them. This is fairly straightforward. Oh, that one actually didn't open. If you accidentally close that, you can go ahead and open up the details panel. It's just a window that's nested in another window. Okay. Oh, I closed that. Sorry about that. Go back to our landscape and our paint layers. There we go. So we see that our landscape is in fact receiving some color, and our paint layers are in fact painting. I'm going to select an area up here so we can kind of see what's happening. So we've added our grass and we've added our gravel. We haven't added stone yet. We can do that later, but I'm going to go ahead and select the grass. And I'm just going to click once and then leave it alone. Let's go ahead and turn the strength up to 100. Is everybody seeing this? Now, yes, these textures are ugly because they're the default textures. But I'm holding down Shift now. You can see how you can paint out some of these areas. Left click, Shift, Shift, left click. Just regular left click. And we can see that the material is in fact painting on the ground. It absolutely is. Let's go ahead and add the stone. Weight blended layer normal. It's trying to put the layer info file. That's what it's populating in here. Do you guys see that there's a layer info file in both of these? What it is, it's just a map. And make sure you save them. It's just a map for where the layer is putting color. Oh, make sure you have the correct palette selected. Touch it once, wait for it to compile, and then paint again. And you don't have to be at 100% blending. You can, in fact, start kind of mixing the materials by adding some different layers. You can continue to paint. Continue to paint down. And that's kind of the benefit of being on on one layer. You can actually add a bunch of different paint to the layering system of your engine, especially in the landscape tool. So let's say we wanted to play around a little bit with, maybe the tiling is ugly, and in this particular case the tiling is ugly. Let's go back to the landscape. Let's open up the terrain editor, or the terrain material, and we can actually manipulate the landscape coordinates in here. I'm going to go ahead and minimize this window here, or rather make it a little smaller so that I can see it. I'm going to set the mapping scale to 0.5 and I'm going to apply and see what it does to the world. Shaders need to recompile. Okay, that made the problem worse. That's fine. Let's set this up to like maybe a 3. Hit apply. This is up to maybe like 8. Hit apply. Let's have a look. That's looking a lot better. Let's make this a 12. Again, what I'm controlling is the UV tiling on the landscape is what is happening. Now there will be a point where it gets too big and the scale gets really kind of messed up, but by adding and changing the mapping scale, you can affect the way that the texture is appearing on the landscape. Now obviously these base textures are going to look like this because they tile and they look kind of weird. But let's hit play. Let's minimize this. But at play height, this doesn't look too terrible. Let's try to run up here, so we can see our beautiful work. Now, as you can see, our shaders are still compiling, but it might take a second, so that's fine. Always wait for the shaders to finish compiling to assess whether or not your work actually worked. Oh no, I can't actually get up there. Oh my gosh. Right-click, play from here. Oh my gosh, I can't actually get up there. Right-click, play from here. Saves a lot of time. So you can see how our initial pass of paint actually is applying to the landscape. Congratulations! You now know the basics for painting a landscape. Give yourselves a pat on the back. Now, as you can see, the scale for some of these doesn't work at all. And it looks like, unfortunately, let's go ahead and open that up again. Let's open up the landscape material here. We missed plugging in, or rather we forgot to plug in the normal. I saw that when it was on the ground. So let's go ahead and plug in these normal materials. Now, there's going to be definitely some scale problems. Let's go ahead and say that. Some scale problems with the brick, right? Because the brick isn't going to be enormous. Like, that brick is huge in comparison to everything else, right? The nice thing about the landscape technique and about using the landscape painting method is that if you go ahead and go back into these tools here, and let's go ahead and duplicate the landscape coordinate node, and I'm going to set this down to maybe a 5. I think that's going to work. I'm going to plug this landscape coordinates node into our tile for our cobblestone, or like in this particular case, a regular hewn stone. And I'm going to hit save. So you can apply multiple landscape coordinates. It's actually quite easy. Okay. Let's go ahead and minimize that window. And let's try to get the actual scale of the rocks to be correct. That's probably too big. Let's set the mapping scale to like a 1. Let's hit apply. Could take a second here. Again, we're editing stuff as we go. Let's hit play here. Play from here. Let's see if those are the correct size. Oh man, they're a little bit too small. That's probably going to be better at a 4 or a 3.5. It's fine. Let's apply. Again, I'm basing it on his foot size and kind of what brick sizes could be. Now, because landscapes are expected to be tiling, let's play from here. Come on. That's a little bit more comfortable, I think. That's a little bit more what the size I want it to be. Okay. Save that. And again, I showed you guys the difference between apply and save. We now understand kind of the overall difference between being able to paint one layer. Now, with our new changes, we can continue painting out what we already have. Notice how it's respecting the overall scale of everything else, but let's say the grass, for example. We want to paint that in. And we can affect the overall strength and the brush size to essentially make whatever we want to initially. And because paint layers, we can clear all of these individual layers. Like for example, let's get rid of all the stone. Yep. Bam. And now the stone is completely gone. It looks like we had some grass or some gravel painted under there. So we can go ahead and fix that by painting grass over it. Boom. Or if we want very specific areas, let's go ahead and change some things up here. Let's say we didn't like the initial placement of everything. Let's go ahead and clear all the paint. It's going to set us up to our default look again. Let's go ahead and click the grass. And we can actually use a fill layer system. Right-clicking and fill layer. And then we can go ahead and select our gravel. And we can start painting in the gravel based on what we want. Look at that. So if we really want to, we can really just start hewing in some. And you would use probably a bunch of different types of materials, but as you can see, we can get a lot of work done in a short amount of time just by very quickly kind of doing a paint pass. And maybe this area down here is like a little cobblestone path that we set up. Oh, misclicked. Always left click. Little cobblestone path that we had set up. Again, not super sharp, but we can always go ahead and sharpen our fall off. Oh, I know, sweetie, you're a kitty. And of course, if we wanted even more straight fall off, we could create a custom brush that would only paint a certain path. But this is not really how I like doing paths. I like to make splines when I'm making paths. But you can see how we can start kind of creating something that looks relatively okay. This has to deal with kind of the way that these edges are blending. You should probably use a custom brush or a custom spline or something that blends into another material. For example, I probably want to blend this with the gravel. Let's go with a softer brush, lower the strength, increase the fall off. And then probably try to blend something like this. A little bit more blending. To kind of make the system or whatever image that I want or whatever kind of texture that I want to look at. The secret is not necessarily trying to force your landscape to look good by default. I'll show you guys a demo here shortly for understanding why it can be a boondoggle to try to get everything perfect on your landscape, because in reality it's literally just a plane. It's a plane with lumps in it. Now I'm going to go ahead and take this and we're going to go ahead and open up the other project. And I will show you guys how kind of you can use these tools with the spline to make some kind of really interesting kind of details if you already have your landscape material or your terrain shader already set up. So I'm going to go ahead and save everything here. Control-Shift-S. Cool, cool. And we're going to go ahead and open up the other map that we had. And our landmass demo here. Awesome. So we're back in here, right? Cool. So far, so good. Let's go ahead and open this up. And in this particular case, just to be safe, I'm going to go ahead and create a new paint layer. Awesome. And now I'm going to go ahead and select my landscape and apply my terrain shader. Yep. Does everybody see? If it looks like this from far away, it is right. It is correct. Now this can get kind of buggy, but I'm going to go ahead and apply maybe a, just for demo purposes, right? Let me go ahead. As you can see, it's warning this layer has no layer info assigned. I'm going to go ahead and assign these 3 layers. As you can see, it makes a new folder for every particular level, so those layer infos are saved. Save everything while I still can. And I'm going to very quickly make all 3 layer infos and save them. Remember, weight blended layer is your friend. Awesome. So we've got this kind of shaded already, but didn't we use this tool earlier when we were actually managing the way that our blueprint was working? Funnily enough, you can in fact use the splines to add more detail to your work. It actually is pretty ingenious. I'm going to go ahead and see if I can select one here. Let's grab our, what was our first one? Main mountain blueprint. Alright, so that was our main mountain. And we can do something like, whoa, we need to find here is a paint layers. There it is. So our paint layers are right there. And let's go ahead and add one of our materials here. So we had gravel. Let's go ahead and click on this, and we can add the name of our material right here. And once we hit enter, so we are getting a little bit of a blend, as you can see. Alright, and you can see we have access to a bunch of different values in here. Alright, so once you actually have this set up, you can actually start texturing using this technique without having to actually paint anything. This makes it actually kind of unique. Let's go ahead and zoom around and have a look to see what is actually happening. You see that we're getting somewhat of a blend here. It's not exactly what we want. But let's go ahead and select something else over here. Let's go ahead and select our other spline here. We've got our mid-mountain here, so let's go ahead and grab the other one here. We can do kind of the same thing. So we can add some of those materials in there and at least somewhat add them in a, like kind of a natural sort of way. Let's go ahead and grab this one as well. And then from within there, we can go ahead and increase the fall off distance to see how far the influence of that texture is going to work. We can also go in and like clear that. I'm very curious about one action that we can take here. I haven't actually used this before. Not this particular tool, but I mean the, this is 1500. Let's set this to, let's see, is our paint layer located on here? That's okay, that's good. So our paint layer is located. Paint layer. I'm curious if we can clear. So we can in fact clear just the grass. Let's see if that gives the result. There we go. So we see how this is applying. Let's go ahead and fill this already. The grass here. So you see how that blend is actually occurring, right? It actually makes things a little bit more complicated because this is adding as a kind of an additive blend. So you can see kind of how that weight blend is applying kind of everywhere. We can go ahead and actually fix that too, so we can reapply the gravel as a non-weight blend. Let's see if we can solve that problem. I'm going to go ahead and find its layer info. Set it to no weight blend and save. And see if we can kind of solve that issue there. Clear that. So we are getting our nice blend there.